Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about where we're going next, we humans. Where are we going next as a species? What's next for us? So I'm going to be talking about an earlier book of mine, which is called Human 3.0. Human 3.0 is actually my first novel, but it's a hybrid novel. It's half of it's a novel and half of it's essays about where we're going next as a species. And let me give you a background that the way that I think about where we're going as a species, what humans are going to be next, is entirely different from what you typically hear in sci-fi. And so I often call this book, Human 3.0, anti-sci-fi. And this is a very rough generalization, but the typical kind of way that people imagine the future, and sci-fi is often like that, is that it's packed with technology that turns us into something smarter. We're using, maybe there's chips in our brains that are interacting and enhancing our brains. We have potentially, different kinds of add-ons to our body, making us physically stronger. Most of these things are sort of centrally, smart companies have figured out how the brain works and are trying to even do better than that. They're trying to do one up on the brain. They're building artificial intelligence that's better than the brain, and just basically trying to outdo our current technology, our current biological technology that we were born with. And I think that's not going to happen. And at any rate, it's not going to happen anytime soon. And that when you understand why we are who we are today, then you can extrapolate from that and have a much better idea, at least a vague impression about where we're going to be going next as a species. So, what are we today? I like to call ourselves human 2.0s because we're not, and I've talked about this in other videos, this is not the first time I've mentioned the 2.0 part of ourselves. Human 1.0s are our biological selves. These would have been ourselves before cultural evolution got up and running. So in this case, all of the smart stuff in us, all the biological stuff, is smart because of natural selection, which is a decentralized process which over epochs, long periods of time, creates the most interestingly fancy, ingenious designs in the universe. So this is why we've got just eyeballs and brains and just every little bit of us, and pruny fingers which turn into rain treads. This was one of my earlier discoveries with Roman Weber. Rain treads, so that they become rain treads when it's dewy or rainy, and otherwise become smooth like race car tires. So we're filled with these kinds of instincts, brilliant design that natural selection, the decentralized process of natural selection, gave us. And our human 1.0 selves are not nearly as smart as we believe ourselves to be today. We're a little smarter than a chimpanzee, significantly smarter, but twice as smart, 3 times as smart, maybe 1.5 times as smart, depending on how you count. But today we're fundamentally different kind of creature than our human 1.0 selves, and we tend to forget that, or just don't realize that who we are today is a product of cultural selection. And cultural selection is a new kind of designer that's designing as a blind watchmaker again, and it's decentralized, and it's done by all of us over time, experimenting with new kinds of things that do stuff to our brains and other kinds of things. And over time, artifacts in the world shape themselves, get shaped by cultural selection to fit our brilliant biology. Our biology is not changing, as we've talked about many times before. We are not deeply plastic. We're no more plastic than Pistachio the parrot right over there. All of the brilliance of animals comes by virtue of piles of exquisite instincts and a small teeny dose of plasticity for which humans are in no way special. What makes us seem so beyond other animals is because cultural selection has been this new designer which has given us all of these new things, and it's done so by harnessing our ancient, instinctual, unchanged brain. So this is the topic of in my earlier book, Vision Revolution. In chapter 4, I believe, I talk about the origins of writing. So how writing culturally evolved over time so that the letters look like nature, thereby harnessing our visual object recognition, which wasn't for letters. There's no parts of our brains that was ever for reading. It harnessed that object recognition part, which we are brilliant at, and said, well, let's just use that for reading. This is cultural evolution talking. Let's use that for reading, but the trick is we got to make reading, we got to make letters and letters and all of the writing look like nature, so that we can harness that brilliant half of the human brain. And then in my earlier book, Harnessed, on music and language, and spoken language, that is the reason that we can have spoken language, even though I'm claiming against many of the other scientists, I'm the only one with this kind of position, is that we don't have language because we're infinitely plastic and we can learn lots of things we're not supposed to. And it's not because we have a language instinct either. Instead, cultural evolution shaped the sounds of speech to sound like something we're already good at hearing, namely the sounds of solid object events, the sound of events. Events hit and slide, and they have a particular fundamental structure and universal patterns for what they sound like. And when you work it out in Harness, I should be able to show, those universal sounds have exactly the kinds of patterns that you find in spoken language. Like hits sounds like p, k, t, and slides sound like the fricatives, sh, s, and they combine with the rings. When you hit something, things vibrate, and you can tell what they are. Those are the vowels, and they combine as a hit ring. Anyway, the reason we are who we are today is 80% determined by the fact that we have spoken language, 10% due to the fact that we have written language. And then we have other things like music and all of these other things which also harness us. Music has culturally evolved to sound like a human moving evocatively in our midst. And then all of the products in our society, from the chairs and the phones that we have, sure, there's exquisite design that you can give Doug or Susie credit for working over at Apple or wherever it might be, but the totality of all these things often have design principles baked into them that none of them really has any idea about. It's just that over time they've gotten part of our culture, that people always do that. They don't know why, and it works because cultural selection has figured out that it works because it harnesses facets of our unchanging human brain. And all of these things together makes us astronomically smarter in the ways that matter to us today compared to Pistachio, who's brilliant over there, and chimpanzee, other great apes and all these other animals. And that's what makes us human 2.0s today. It's all of this cultural technology that it built for us, and it did so by harnessing our brilliant, unchanging brains and bodies. Right? So then the question I asked was, okay, how can I talk about what's going to be next for humans? We're already human 2.0. That's the story for how we became human 2.0, is this kind of nature harnessing, cultural evolution, evolving these things to look like nature, sound like nature, or otherwise be kind of similar to the kinds of things that our brains evolved to accommodate, to brilliantly accommodate. Well, what would human 3.0 be? Well, no one really knows, of course, the future, but asking someone to be a futurologist or whatever is a really bad idea. But this is where I thought a novel was in order. So this is why I wrote Human 3.0. So Human 3.0 was written in the first half of fiction, to provide a kind of sample future where you can imagine that there's all of these creatures don't seem like us. They seem to have all of these extra kinds of powers, but when you actually unpack it, you realize that no, there's further kind of cultural harnessing of a sort that I won't talk about that allows them these sorts of powers. And so, of course, there's who knows which direction the future will go. And then the other half is essays. But one of the interesting things about this book was that even though it was written well before COVID and collective hysteria, and it's nevertheless, all of it is about human basic psychology, the instincts that we're stuck with, and it's also packaged up in the kinds of collective hysterias that happen with loads and loads of humans in society. And so, unbeknownst to me at the time, a lot of what I talk about in Human 3.0 is both emphasizing the degree to which we're all susceptible to collective hysterias and the kinds of forces that shape societies, and they really are freakishly, from my point of view now, similar to the kinds of things that we've been having to grapple with in real life since COVID hit us. So again, go ahead and, this is a nice way to support. This is my only book that I've decided to do on my own without having a proper publisher. I've got, 5 other books, Expressly Humans, coming out with Dr. Tim Barber this summer, and by virtue of the standard channels. But if you just go to changizi.com, just changizi.com. You can find Human 3.0 over there, and you'll get then a much better richness by virtue of the novel and the essays in the back about who we are today, where we might be going in the future. And I think by understanding who we are today, one can wrap one's head more around the kinds of forces that have been buffeting us for the last couple of years and will continue to do so. And that was your science moment.